It looks like we're on.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yes. Welcome to Mindset Revolution with Raquel. I have a very important and great guest. Her name is Maria Belanic, and I want to introduce you to her via her about page on her website. I thought that it was a really great way for me to introduce you to you. It says, "Do you feel completely alone, suffering from isolation and loneliness, feeling anxious about what society says on how to live after loss? You may wonder, how will I live without my loved one?" And you hear people say to move on and to get over it. And the regrets of what haves and should haves play in your mind with the if only of guilt. Unfortunately, grief is an unknown territory. The journey is daunting, like being in a boat with no paddles and compass, just drifting. So my very special guest is Maria Belanic, a mom who knows the pain of loss all too well. After her eldest son died from cancer, the expectation was that she would bounce back. No one understood the darkness she felt, the exhaustion, and the fear. Grief is not one and done, it's personal. And you have the right to grieve your way with no shame or time limit. Validating your feelings and the many complex emotions is part of your journey in creating a sacred space of joy. Welcome to Mindset Revolution, Maria Balanic. I am so excited that you are here with me today, especially because I'll be releasing this during the holiday season, where I know, and I know for myself, my children, I have three children for those of you who are new, almost 22, 19, and 13, and they lost their father in 2020. And I know for us, it has been a very trying time, healing time, and it's not something that just goes away. You still have the echo, even when you feel you know that the person is in a better place. There's still echoes of them wishing that they were here, and having those. I know for myself, the what ifs. What if I would have done something differently? What if he would have done something differently? You know, the things that I know my children. One of the things that my daughter talks about is, she won't have her dad walking her down the aisle. And that was a dream of hers. And having those dreams of your loved one, of what's going to happen with them and for them, and then feeling like it was snatched away. So, Maria, you can go ahead and take the floor and talk about what really led you to um, provide such a valuable service.
Well, Raquel, thank you so much for having me. And of course, my condolences on the loss of your ex and to your family. I know that doesn't matter how long it's been, at times it can still feel very raw. And that's a journey that I wish people didn't have to take, but unfortunately, we do. And it's someone actually once told me one time, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when are we going to experience loss. And that at times can be daunting. And I'm so excited to be here and to share about grief because realistically, I always go, that's my topic. That's what I talk about. And my journey actually started because I was getting really frustrated and tired of everyone telling me, aren't you over it yet? You're still stuck. Like, come on, you got to get back to normal. And then I was looking at it going, and what is normal? Like, my oldest son is not here. Like, when I look at my family, because he still lived at home, even though he was 27, I always go, we're an Italian background. We never leave home.
Puerto Rican, yes, it's the same. We don't leave home.
Right? So it's that aspect of we live in the same home still. We're still in the same house. So his presence is constantly missed. And even if we were to move anyplace else, I would still miss his presence. And that's really what grief is. It's the missing of the presence. There's the grief of the immediate loss of when they're passing away. But as you had mentioned in regards to your daughter, there's the missing of the future dreams of what could have been, of what would have been. And that's the other part that we are missing and grieving in grief. And it's not really a matter of being stuck. Because I look at it going, when we care for someone, when we love for someone, we talk about them,
Mhm.
we express our feelings in different ways. And realistically, that is what grief is. And as someone else once shared to me, she goes, she was out with her friends and they were talking about their children and all the things that they were up to. She would talk about her son who had passed away. And they're like, oh, you're still talking about him like you're stuck. And she's like, you guys can talk about your children in the present tense. All I have are my memories. And
Mhm.
I'm going to share my memories just as much as you're sharing your children's lives right now as they are happening. And realistically, that's really what grief is. It's not that we're stuck. These people lived. And how are we supposed to forget them? And I don't think that we ever should. And I really feel that as a griever, our emotions need to be expressed. Expressed, of course, in a healthy way, but a healthy way means that we've been acknowledged and other people have witnessed our pain. It's when people are wanting to brush us off that I think we
Mhm.
kind of it's what I call hidden grief. It's we hide our feelings. We don't want other people to feel uncomfortable because we may be sad. But seriously, have you ever seen anyone who is happy 24/7, 365 days a year? I have.
No. Not at all. No, nobody is. And but that's like it reminds me of like the old Instagram, right? Where everybody was like happy and painted this beautiful picture and the whole life was airbrushed. It was an airbrushed life because it wasn't real. And I think that's one of the things that people love about TikTok then is because people just come on there for the most part and be very raw. And if they're too um it's almost like too professional, they don't do as well. If
Mhm.
everything looks too good, they don't do as well. I know that I have a friend of mine who lost her son right after he was born, and she still talks about him almost in the present tense, even though it's been a few years, even though she's been blessed with another child. Um, she's still grieving through that, and I know that sometimes people look at that like you're still talking about him. It's been a few years already.
Mhm.
But even though he didn't have the opportunity to live very long, um, he was still, there were still dreams attached to him and joy attached to him and excitement over him participating in their life and in the world and having all that snatched away. So what would you recommend for those of us who um, I think in the initial stages, people are just very compassionate and empathetic. But then as time goes on, it's like you said, right? They're just like, you're still talking about that. What would you recommend for people who are friends with family with people who are still, who've lost somebody who was significant to them? What is the best thing that they can do for that person that, they do love them?
Mhm.
Um, but it's like you said, sometimes people are like, why are you still talking about this?
Yeah. And that is definitely a good question. I applaud your friend for talking about her child, that even though her child didn't live that long, it's still her child, right? It made an impact
Yeah.
on her life, and she has every right to talk about her child. And I think for other people, to be supportive is to say, to give permission, to say, allow someone to share their stories, whether it's a sad moment or a joyous occasion that they're remembering. The
Yeah.
share is important. And it's not about giving advice or giving a platitude of saying, oh, well, you're still stuck, you're still talking about it. No. And it's right to talk, I feel, in the present tense, because I'm actually starting to do that now too. Because realistically, that person lived for however long, whether it's day zero or they lived for 50 years or 100 years, their lives made an impact on their loved ones. And
Mm-hmm.
it is something. And so to me, it's about listening to what someone else is saying, just like you would at someone else going out talking about their spouse or their living child. You know how we listen to people who talk about the present tense of what their childs are up to right now?
Yes.
Listen in the same way. Don't offer any advice. Just listen and take your cue from the person. If they're saying that they're missing that person, then say, yeah, that is really hard to miss them. Right. And I always go, when people go, I can't imagine. Well, realistically, none of us can imagine living the life of someone who's lost someone. I always go, even myself as a griever, I don't know what another mom is feeling. I have some inklings, but
Mm-hmm.
that mom and her relationship is different than the relationship I had with my son. And that's what makes grief unique.
Yeah.
And especially during the holiday times, as we're getting closer and closer to the holidays, these emotions come up even more so, I think, because we notice even more. I mean, we always notice when someone is missing, but during the
Mm-hmm.
holidays at these family gatherings, sometimes, people find comfort, and other times people are kind of like, yeah, my person isn't here. So it's actually even harder.
Yeah.
And that's why I think when people need a bit more support, not so much sympathy, because sympathy is another thing that's either opens up the wounds or can feel supportive or not supportive. Because sympathy sometimes is one of those things where people are pitying, and I don't feel that grievers want pity. They just want understanding and
Yeah.
support.
Yeah. So, what would you? So I forgot to turn off my other phone. Um, what what would you recommend for those who are, um, maybe this is like the first holidays, or birthday, whenever they're watching this, the first birthday, the first holiday, the first anniversary without their loved one, what would be your recommendation on processing some of that grief?
Well, my tip of that, and it is, I mean, the firsts are daunting and super hard. And at times, the other years don't make it any easier either. Sometimes the first year, you're still sort of in that limbo state of shock. And I would suggest do what makes you feel comfortable. Maybe you want to be around people, maybe you don't. I always go, if you don't feel like celebrating the birthdays or the holidays, then don't. If you want to cancel something, it's perfectly fine. Sometimes you can even do new traditions. I know my first Christmas after my son passed away, I didn't want anything. I didn't want any decorations. I didn't even want to be around people. I just wanted to be by myself. And that's okay, as long as you know that this is what you want and why you're doing it. And sometimes that is the harder part, is really getting into our feelings and acknowledging them for our own selves. And that's the first step, is really acknowledge what you're feeling and then go from there and do what it is that makes you comfortable. So it could be just going out for a walk or even volunteering or doing, as I mentioned beforehand, creating a new tradition. Or sometimes people get comfort in being surrounded by people and in the old traditions that they've had beforehand. So it's really up to the individual person,
Yeah.
but you have to do what feels best for you.
Do you think, or have you seen where because maybe the grief has not been processed in a healthy way, where time has passed and it just seems like the person has created their own personal prison of hurt, and other people can witness it. It's not like they want them to move on, but they're noticing maybe that I recalling someone specific where it's almost like time stood still. And even though she had other children, she lost a child. She had a surviving child who adored her. It was almost like nothing mattered because her older son he died very young through negligence in a hospital. And so it was like years and years, and people are noticing that it's almost like she hasn't not moved on, but she hasn't like processed it. So people start to get worried, like, you're kind of in that moment of grief. Doesn't seem like it was processed because there's still, it's almost like that's the best way I can explain it. Like time stood still for that person. What would you recommend if you have a friend or a family member where you're concerned, like, I don't want you to get over your grief, but I don't know if this is healthy to hold on to this moment for over a decade, and it doesn't seem like you're even living your own life anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people think of grief. And sometimes it's not so much, I always go processing. People know that their loved one is gone. What I feel what happens is, and this is my own personal opinion, my own experience, is that everyone around you all of a sudden expects for that person to be supportive of their needs. So the person who's grieving probably feels that no one has been supportive to them, that no one has actually really listened and heard what they've actually said and what they've actually felt. So in some ways, they may not have had access in how to express their feelings. And so what happens, it gets stuck inside. And so because of that, it becomes, you're living in limbo, or sometimes, like I always like to say, you're kind of like the walking dead. You're alive, but you're not really fully living.
Yeah.
And in some instances, which is true, even if you have other children, they actually do suffer, because in some ways they are still wanting to live, but their world has also changed because all of a sudden their parents are quite different. Like their parents are now kind of removed. And I know for myself, and it depends on whether people are faith-based or not, all of a sudden some of the passages in the Bible kind of to me made sense of, you can have a flock of sheep and one goes missing and you go after that one, and that's the one that you keep thinking about.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, well, if you already have everybody else, like, until I lost my own son. And then I realized, because I have two boys, all of a sudden I was like missing my firstborn. And it took me a while to kind of say, wow, I have to do something different, because otherwise, what message am I giving to my other son that he isn't important? So it has to come from within, but it also has to be where another person can feel supportive. Now, whether they need to go get professional help to be allowed to express freely, or be in a community where others themselves have experienced grief and can understand what she is going through, or he is going through. So again, it's really unique, and it depends. I mean, for me personally, I always go, I was in limbo for 10 years. Yes, in year 3, I had noticed that, oh, wow, I got to do something, because, I probably have wrecked my other son, my younger son, because I've been mourning and really not paying attention to him. Like, you are and you're not. I mean, and they know that you've checked out. And so I took steps, but again, it's still a long journey. Like it's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I think sometimes people we read too much for our own good. And so we'll go through, they're like all the different stages of grief, and then they're wanting to rush the process. But I found even, as a coach, that nothing's linear. You can feel all five in a day, or go from one moment, one stage to another stage to the middle stage, and they can just kind of go in cycles. And so when people are going through this, what is, like, I know you're talking about support. Um, how do we continue to support them? Is it just really the listening ear, like you said earlier, and
It's
almost like repeating what they said? Like you saying they miss them, and then like I like scripts sometimes, because sometimes we don't know what to say. We feel like, and or if you're having a really great, if like your child, and then you really want to talk about what's happening with them, you don't want to make them sad, and then you're like, I don't know how to,
Mhm.
behave, because
Well,
I have what you no longer have. And I know I've noticed that as well, where people are just like, I don't know what to say, and then they
yeah.
end up like disconnecting from that friendship or that person because they don't know how to connect with them anymore. What would be your recommendation?
Really just following in and taking the lead from the person who is grieving. Now, one of my beliefs is that there are no 5 stages. And I know that society has been following almost like there's these stages that grievers go through, when in fact, as you said, there isn't. You can have different emotions all in one day, and you could be angry for years on end because it really depends on how the person passed away.
Yeah.
And are some things resolved? Especially, I always go, depending on what it is. Like if it's a murder and you're going to court all the time, it is reopening the wounds constantly.
Yeah.
and and even sometimes with an illness. So it really just depends. Or people who all of a sudden pass away, like in accidents. There's always unresolved issues. Or sometimes, because I think at times we have this guilt and regret, especially as parents. And I always go, especially as mothers, right? As women, we seem to carry the guilt constantly with us. I don't know what it is, if we've been wired for it or we've been taught that, everything's our fault, which in fact is not. If it's an adult child or an adult person, they made their own choices that we have no control over. And what I found is that having the guilt keeps us from acknowledging that we had no control in what happened.
Mm.
But back to your question of support, I
Yeah.
would say just talk to someone. And if you want to share something that's happening in your life, kind of say, hey, is it okay if I share what's happening with my children? Someone who is grieving understands that there's, other children are still alive. Even though we may be envious and jealous, I always go, sometimes that's one of the things when someone's had a child pass away. Sometimes we look at other families and we're like, how come their children are living? And it's not that you want anyone else to pass away. It's just this deep yearning that you want your own child still to be here.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's having, because if you're a close friend or someone, then you can actually say, is it okay? Right? Like ask permission or invite them to say, look, I'd love you to share about your child. Like, what was your favorite memory? Like, what was something funny that they did? So I think sometimes having them talk as their child was in a present tense, even though it could be decades ago, brings back
Yeah.
some memories. And even if they cry, that's okay. Because you know what? That makes that person happy that someone else is actually thinking of their child or of the person that passed away.
Yeah. I think that, sometimes we forget that, we are to love our neighbors as ourselves, and putting ourselves like, what would I want in that situation? Or what would I want from that friend of mine, or from a
Mhm.
friend at all, or family member, and just like pausing enough to say, okay, let me ask. I think people are afraid to ask, so that's really great, because it gives the people who didn't go through that but love the person that did, also permission to engage with some questions, and then not to be offended if the person says, I don't want to talk about it, or the answer is no, or no, I'm not coming, and then really not take anything personally, because the person who's grieving is doing what they need to do for themselves, and
So
just being open to loving them in the way that they want to receive love. I think that goes with any relationship. A lot of times we love people the way we want to be loved, and that's not always the case. We need to, if we want the connection to be healthy, then we need to provide people room to be themselves and to receive love in the way they want to, when they want to, and just being
yes.
sensitive to the waves of the other person.
Hmm. And you've hit it right on the mark, Raquel, is about not how we want to be loved, but love that person for who they are. I remember a friend of mine, and I applaud her for being honest. She actually told me to my face, Maria, I can't be around sad people. I'm really sorry. I got my own issues and I don't do sadness. And I respected her way more for saying that. And
Yeah.
a lot of people were a little put off when I said that. But I respected her for that rather than some of my other friends who would constantly tell me, oh, are you still stuck? Are you still there? Like, like, can't you get over it? Like, aren't you moving on? So I'm going, you know what? Like, you have to be honest even for your own self. Even if when you're a non-griever, be honest with yourself and the person who's grieving. Like if you're uncomfortable with someone who's grieving, I think they would respect that way more, saying, I'm really sorry. And I know that you're having a hard time and struggling. I just don't know how to support you. And I don't know if I can be around you. Not because of the hurt or anything like that. I just don't know what to say. And I'm afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing, which is even going to open up wounds for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this has been really great, because the main thing is just giving people permission, give them room, love and accept your friend or your family member the way you would like to be loved and accepted, which means that giving them permission to just grieve the way they need to. Or if you're on the other side, you're like, I don't want to be around sadness. That's a hard conversation too, and that also takes bravery to recognize, like, I can't do this because I have my own issues. And I don't know what to say, and I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, and just to have those honest conversations, like, I love you but I can't. And that's hard, but it's also necessary, because then, like you said, then people are like sticking around out of obligation or because they love you, but then they want you to process things, or to, like you said, move on, which is not appropriate, for you.
Mhm.
This has been a really great talk. Is there anything that you would like to share with this audience before we end this podcast?
Yes, thank you so much, Raquel. So, as the holidays are coming on December the 8th, I am holding a free event, and it's coping through the holidays. Because the holidays are a hard time. And let's face it, the movies are these Hallmark movies, and Instagram and all this social media makes everything look like that we should be merry and happy, and it's a joyous occasion, where in fact, a lot of people are suffering silently. And so these are practical tips of how to cope through the holidays. December the 8th. Check out my mariabelanic.com, and it is on my website.
Okay, wonderful. So I will go ahead and link that everywhere you're finding this, and wherever Maria and I are friends on social media, I'll go ahead and also tag her in it, so it's easier for you to find her and also to recommend her as your, because like she said in the beginning, it's not a matter of if, but when. And if it's these things will be great to remember when it's your turn. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easier, but at least you won't feel alone. And you know that there are other people who are feeling deep grief as well. And that it's okay. That you're okay to feel it. It's okay to get angry. It's okay to go through all the emotions. It's okay, quote unquote, not to get over it so fast, because we don't. If the more you love them, the more things are going to remind you of them. And so why would you forget somebody you so deeply loved? People still remember their first loves, even though they haven't seen that person in 30 years. So why would you forget somebody or try to forget somebody who meant so much to you? We love you very much. And until next time, which will be very, very soon, don't forget to check out Maria Belanic at mariabelanic.com. It's been a pleasure serving you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Raquel.
You're welcome.